Have you ever experienced your faith life going around in circles and wondered why this happens? Well, the reason is simple. It's because God's maps are that way. A case in point is today's first reading, where Elijah, the prophet, is running away. We have just a small part of the entire story, and it would be nice if we could read from chapter 18 onwards that tell us the complete story. The story begins with Elijah slaughtering the prophets of Baal in the duel between Elijah and them. And because they were on the payroll of Queen Jezebel was extremely upset and threatens to kill Elijah before sunset. Elijah does what any of us would do, run for his life. And as he's running, that's where today's passage begins. As he's running, he is fed by God on the way, not once, but twice. And this gives him sufficient strength to walk on for 40 days and 40 nights till he reaches the mountain of God, Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai as it's also called. And ironically, when Elijah is there, God comes to him in a still, gentle breeze. And the question that God asks him is, Elijah, why are you here? God then sends him all the way back to Damascus, where he is supposed to anoint Jehu in place of Ahab. This might seem like a random story, except if you were to open a map of the Middle East and look at the direction in which Elijah is headed, God could have directly told him from Mount Carmel to go on to Damascus, because God has taken him from the northeast right to the south and then sent him back on the same path and further on to Damascus. Why does God do this? Well, this is typically God's way of working. He's done it with Elijah. He's done it with Moses, who is sent back to Pharaoh after he's running away from him. He does it with Jacob when he has to confront his problem. And this is how God works. God doesn't let us escape from our problems, but rather he takes us back after a very, very circuitous route back to addressing our problems, our issues. And this makes all the difference to Elijah. Elijah, having encountered God, is now strong enough to go and face his so-called perils, his so-called threats. This is also what Jesus promises. He invites people to come to him and he says, this journey is going to be a difficult journey, but this journey is something where I will sustain you. How? Because I am the living bread that has come down from heaven. This bread will not keep you hungry, but will satiate all your appetite. I am the living bread. He who eats of me will live forever. We see this also in the second reading, where Paul speaks to the Ephesians. The Ephesians know quite well how to live so-called a Christian life. But Paul emphasizes that living the Christian life essentially means being like Jesus. And being like Jesus essentially means confronting our problems head on. Everyone has an argument with somebody or the other. Everyone has their ups and downs in relationships. And very often, when there is a bitter argument, we don't want to face the problem. We prefer the escape route. But what does Paul remind us? He says, in being like Jesus, you ought to forgive. You ought to accept the other person. You must go out of your way to embrace that person. You must go out of your way to win that person over. Why? Because this is what God does with each one of us time and again. And because we share in this special relationship with God in and through Jesus Christ, you and I are called to reflect the very same Jesus in our words and in our actions. Our relationships must be the same as God has with each one of us. Where God accepts us, we must accept others. The road to holiness, my dear brothers and sisters, is difficult not because God has made it that way, but it is difficult precisely because you and I choose a circuitous path. Rather than facing our issues, we want to run away. And as we meet God, we come back and we face the problems because we have the strength to do so. The readings, my dear brothers and sisters, challenge us. They invite us to come back on the road that leads to life. Remember, Jesus often reminds us in the gospel, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You and I are called to get on that way that leads to life. Amen.